Hello and welcome to the Tilted Roll podcast. I will be your podcast master, Marshall, and today we're going to kind of be talking about how to be a better player. And while player oftentimes is looked at as the one who is playing the adventure, the one with the character sheets and the player's manuals and whatnot, this is actually going to be about both the player or the adventurer and the DM, because everybody is about equal as an adventurer or a player as anyone else. And together, they come together to really make the game work the way it is. And we're going to start off, though, with kind of how to be the better adventurer. And this is going to be, how to make the perfect character and how to play that character perfectly. This is going to be about, how to really kind of set yourself into the world, because the reality is, and this is something that's said by a lot of veteran D&D players, is that characters aren't just about their stats. And there are people still that prefer to really set their characters kind of in this min-max format where they have the best stats in the right places, and they're combat kings or queens, and they are so good at that. But outside of combat, then they're not as useful, and they're really kind of one-dimensional look at how to be an adventurer. Let's start, for example, let's say, we have a character who is a fighter, and, they've been a warrior. They have, super heavy armor, big weapon, they're strong, they have a lot of health, but maybe, you've dumped all the rest of your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, for all of those combat stats for you as a fighter. Now suddenly, nobody wants to listen to you because you're dumb as a rock. You have zero wisdom and you're blunt, and people aren't inspired by you. They think you're a joke. Then what is your character at that point? That's no fun. At least, to me. And so while you can have characters with flaws, I think you want to make them not too flawed. And I think doing something like that ends up in having them be just maybe a little too flawed in a lot of areas. Let's, for example, kind of a character that almost had to min-max almost out of desperation, that just kind of stopped being fun after a while, was a character I had in a campaign that was outside of our show. And he was made pretty low rolls in terms of his ability score, so I kind of just had to pick what was best for him. And I picked, he was a wizard, so he had the highest intelligence, was his highest stat. And then I tried to go dexterity next, so he kind of was lacking in the charisma, wisdom, constitution, and strength categories, very not as well set. But as a result, he kind of wasn't that fun, because suddenly now I'm, in combat and I'm trying to keep a distance, but I'm getting hit by two swarms of bats and I'm almost dying, which is never fun and doesn't make you want to play that character. So, and that's kind of why, in general, you really want to try to really push yourself to kind of play a character that, has interesting flaws or has interesting setups. If you want to play that fighter who's the veteran warrior and maybe they led their team in a battle and their backstory, then they should have more charisma, because then maybe that'll make them more inspiring. People will have the desire to follow them, or maybe they'll be a little more intimidating, things like that, that they can be a little more effective in kind of what they do outside of combat, which is half as much of the importance as to the combat itself in D&D. And then very similarly, something that you really need to do when you kind of are setting this character then is really then integrate them into the world. I talked about backstories and kind of setting up maybe an interesting backstory for that fighter, and that's something that kind of really has to be put into what have they done and how does that backstory affect them. Maybe you're a farm character who who's a farmer. They started a family, especially if they're a race that has a long lifespan, like elves or gnomes, where they live hundreds and hundreds of years. Maybe they're almost 200, but they have had a family and their kids are becoming adults, and they have a lot less responsibilities in terms of their family and what they have to do for their family and their land. So, and maybe they've always dreamt of going on adventures and traveling and, being able to fight monsters, and they've always fantasized about this. And now suddenly that opportunity has come to them, and this is their chance. Now you have two things. You have, a character that has dynamics, and they have something that they really are looking to do. But then also you have an anchor point, when all of a sudden things happen in the world that are bad, maybe you're going to fight some big demon lord and they're threatening to destroy the world. Well, yeah, sure. Saving the world's all well and good, like any, comic or superhero concept, that exists out there. But, bring it back home even more. They're about, if they destroy, everything, that means your home and everything that is going to be gone. A good example of this obviously is Lord of the Rings. It's obviously an 80-year-old example, and it's not necessarily as relevant to D&D, but still fits. That Frodo in Lord of the Rings was a simple farm boy, and he was torn between wanting to be an adventurer and wanting to live his comfortable life in the Shire. And, he kind of thrust it upon himself to go on the adventure and go on this dangerous mission to handle the ring, because that was what was important to him, because he knew that if everything was led to destruction and the world had to kind of crumble around it, that would mean that simple life that he kind of still wants and he wanted to go back to wouldn't exist. And he felt that it was upon himself, that he had already managed to hold the ring for as long as he did, that he would have that ability to be able to finish it. And obviously the rest of the story goes the way it does, but that is something that you can kind of utilize in your characters to be able to really integrate them into that world. And especially similarly to Frodo, develop them as they go on that adventurer. Frodo didn't stay that simple farm boy. He, witnessed horrors and atrocities and, the death of his adventurers and his teammates. And that changed him. And your characters should change as you go through the adventure. They may not start as as this simple thief, and all they care about is money and all they want to do. But then maybe as they go through the adventure, they finally just start to see that the world is a lot more than just what they've been dealing with, and that there's going to be maybe a lot more important at stake than just the amount of money that they make. And you should really integrate that into kind of how you grow, because if you've been going through a lot of stuff in a campaign, that's kind of something to keep in mind of. Now, that being said, all of that only really matters if your DM has kind of set up the world for you to be able to kind of integrate into. And while kind of having this base setting is all well and good, especially, if you've made this cool homebrew kind of idea and you've been writing this story for months or weeks, or you just went out and you bought a campaign setting from Dungeons and Dragons at a bookstore. The thing you have to remember as a DM is that this world has to live. While it lives in the imagination, player imagination only goes so far. You have to be able to set up this world around them and be able to throw them in there and say, this world is, living and you are a part of it. And that way, then they can integrate these characters into it. And one thing that can always be really challenging for a DM, especially a newer DM, to deal with is the unpredictability of the party members that you will have. You can never make the decisions. You never should try to make the decisions for your party members, as they want to live in this world. They want to integrate themselves, and as a result, they're going to have wishes and desires of their own that they're going to try to push forward and finish goals of. And you should always be take in mind what those goals are and be able to foster kind of those paths to happen. You don't want to force them into too many situations. You don't want to just be like, no, we have to go do this, we have to finish this quest, we have to finish this storyline. And sometimes you have to remind them of the story that they're on or the quest that they're on, but you shouldn't force them to be like, no, you have to do this right now, this is more important, because you aren't the adventurer, you are the world carrier. And you could try to foster the ability for these kind of ways of going back. You can give them cause to action, but it doesn't mean that you have to just tell them, and force them into the path that you want. You should allow them to take the many paths to the final destination that are available, which are generally going to be plenty. There are plenty going to be options that are available to be able to give them as a way to get to the kind of that final point. It doesn't just have to be what you wrote or what's in the book. Maybe kind of be able to work on the fly. That's something you really have to be able to do, is be open to ideas from your adventures and have ways that you can change your story. Even, like I said, even if it's a pre-written story that you got from a bookstore, in this campaign setting, you have to really be able to change on the fly. Because like something that I've been, struggling a lot in terms of Shadows of an Empire, our Twitch show on this show on Twitch, though, something that I've struggled with a lot is, the ability to give my players more freedoms than they could, because right now they're kind of in a very locked situation. So the ability to try to give them as many freedoms as I can in kind of the situation that they're in has become very difficult, and something that I'm struggling to kind of get a grasp on. And that's something that I think you'll always have that type of struggle on, no matter how experienced of a DM you are. But it is very important to be able to kind of give your players as much choice as you can, but you obviously don't want to give it too many, because then you'll kind of lose purpose. And as much as players may want to be able to kind of choose their way through things, giving them an overarching goal will generally keep them on track better than not. But that is going to do it for us this time on the Tilted Roll podcast. Thank you guys for joining us on kind of this sample episode and what maybe this could look like. We'll hopefully see it in a larger format soon enough. But otherwise, if you want to check us out, you can see on our links in the description below to our Instagram, Twitch for the actual show, Shadows of an Empire, and other social media. So make sure you can hit those, subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you later, adventurers.